Hello, everyone. I hope that you all enjoyed the documentary as much as I did. Hi, Annie. So my name's Christabel Reed, and I'm the co-director of EcoResolution, the climate action platform that was set up by me, Cara, and my sister Ruby Reed. And we initially did this as a means of just creating more conversation and compassion and awareness around our environmental and climate crisis by getting people to share how they were taking action and showing their commitment for the planet. But then after a little while, we reflected on the fact that whilst behaviour changes and individual action is so profoundly important and beautiful acts of love and awareness, they're not our target, as they don't add up to the type of systemic change that we need in order to truly address our climate and ecological crisis. And I think the documentary just highlights this so beautifully. So we relaunched this year with a mission to support people to step up rather than shut down in the face of our global challenges, and to empower people to transition from the tokenistic actions to more transformational actions, from behaviour change to systems change. So month by month, we've been diving into different topics, starting with food and farming. We're now on waste and consumerism. So here we are. And it's been completely incredible learning about waste and consumerism. Much of what we've been sharing has been the work of Annie Leonard. So I'm so inspired and excited that you're here, Annie. What's been so cool is well, I guess not cool, but just so interesting, is that really realizing how at the root of almost every environmental crisis we face is the crisis of waste and consumerism. And it's not just environmental, it's our social crises, political, individual health and well-being. And by exploring waste and consumerism, you really realize how interconnected these challenges are. So, human rights, the economy, climate change, social justice, global inequality, mental health, these aren't existing in vacuums. These are deeply interlinked. And Annie's book, The Story of Stuff, and the film, The Story of Stuff, the work of Greenpeace, and this brilliant new documentary really highlights this. And so thank you, Annie, so much for joining us, and thank you, Cara, as well.
It's so awesome to be here.
I know, I'm so happy. And what a pleasure to meet you, Annie. So I'm going to go live on Instagram just so everyone can join in on that, and then we can kind of keep talking. So I'm going to just figure that out.
Whilst that happens, I would like us to take a moment to just reflect on the film and to just think back of what have we just been shown? What have we just learned? What are the narratives that have been brought to life that we weren't really engaging with before? So Annie, it would be great to hear a little bit about you and your history and the work that you do.
I would love to. And also want to thank you so much for sharing the story of plastics with folks. I want everybody to see that. I used to feel alone that I was so obsessed with plastic and garbage, and I love that so many people are interested in that now. I actually grew up in the Pacific Northwest in Seattle, in an area that's really beautiful, lots of forests, oceans. And I grew up just loving nature and not thinking so much about plastic and garbage. And it was when I started traveling and going to bigger cities that I started paying a lot of attention to the garbage around and how it was moving around. And when I started looking at the garbage, I realized that that the forests that I loved were being chopped down to be turned into garbage. The beautiful natural areas that I loved were being destroyed by fossil fuel operations to make plastic turn into the garbage. I realized that if you care about nature, you have to care about garbage. And when I started looking more into garbage and waste and plastic, I realized it's not just an environmental issue. It's a justice issue. It's a health issue. It's a social issue. It's an economic issue. Waste and garbage and pollution and plastic, all of that is a great doorway and to enter to see so many things wrong with our economy. So I've spent literally the last 30 years studying waste, and I have traveled to 40 countries to visit the factories where our stuff is made and the dumps where our stuff is dumped. It's a fascinating way to spend your life.
It's a lot braver than a lot of us. So thank you for the work you do. It makes such a difference.
Well, thanks for helping to raise awareness for it. Wasn't that an incredible film, The Story of Plastics? That allowed everybody to take the journey that I took over the last couple of decades.
If I could talk a little bit about that, I haven't cried that much I've cried quite a little bit recently, but that film really got me in a lot of places, and I had to rewind and rewatch it, because at the end of the day, you know, especially now in this time, it's a lot easier to live in the darkness and not educate yourself and to be ignorant in a way. But actually it's not, because you don't, you know, we are as human sensitive creatures who are empathetic. And once you see the plight of what people have to deal with, or, you know, especially the people that, you know, we've all seen the landfills and the dumps and stuff, but you don't actually see or speak to the people that live by them, that have their life expectancies cut, that have to then move away, or just are, you know, with the girl that says she, you know, had the lungs of someone who's a smoker, or lived, you know, in a mine, or like was a miner, that like just killed me. And one thing I was thinking about is, you know, if we were all to imagine the amount of plastic that we had probably gone through in one of our lifetimes, right? See it in front of you and then look at that. Even that's just imagining it. It's probably more than what we even think. And imagine that's just gone somewhere. That's just gone into a fish's mouth, or killed an animal, or is sitting in someone's backyard. And that, to me, was such a powerful like image. I now just don't even want to look at plastic, but unfortunately we're also looking at it right now. But this is different.
Well, I think from a young age, we're indoctrinated not to think about a way. You know, we're told throw something away without thinking about where is a way. You know, beyond our recycling bin or our rubbish bin, where does it go? And we've been trained to think that recycling means putting our plastic container in the right bin, but that's not the end. Where does it go? And so that's one of the things I love about this film, is it takes us to see where it goes. So that out of sight doesn't have to mean out of mind.
Out of mind, 100%. Also, I mean, if anyone hasn't, I haven't read the book yet, but if anyone hasn't seen the story of stuff, watch the YouTube. It's short and it's easy, it's bite-sized. And also, the one thing I really admire about you so much is the way that you talk about things. Even if it's devastating, you still have such a positive attitude. The way you speak about stuff, it's impossible not to listen to you. Like, you have such a positive, infectious nature, even though you've kind of been dealing with the truth that we all don't want to admit for so long. And I'd love to hear like how the making of this film kind of came about, and what did you feel there was like, was there a lacking in the narratives around plastic that you wanted people to know about?
There's lots of lacking in the narrative about plastic, and that's not a coincidence. You know, the plastic industry has been really good at limiting the discussion of plastic and focusing the public attention on our behavior. You know, the term litter bug was actually invented by plastics and petrochemical companies, because they were trying to divert the attention away from the companies that are making this pollution and saturating our lives with plastic, to make it feel like it's our fault, this sort of individual responsibility. And of course, we should be responsible, but it's impossible to be responsible and always make the right choices when those choices aren't available to us, because the plastics, you know, has just permeated our lives. So the kinds of things that were missing from the public understanding of plastic, one is the connection to fossil fuels. A lot of people don't realize that plastics are primarily fossil fuels, and it's hard to understand. It's like a cognitive dissonance. If you're holding a plastic bottle, it doesn't feel like it's oil and gas, but it is. And so connecting it to fossil fuels is really important, which makes us understand how we're not going to stop fossil fuels without stopping single-use plastic, and we're not going to stop single-use plastic without stopping fossil fuels. So the fossil fuels part is important. Another part that's really important is about the corporate intentionality about this. It didn't just happen that plastic became everywhere. It wasn't because consumers demanded it. It wasn't because we said we want the convenience, we never want to wash another dish.
Maybe Cara, you stop and start again.
Plan by the petrochemical industries to expand their markets so that they could drill more oil and gas, turn it into products, and then convince us we need them. And we simply don't need it. So I love that story of plastic shows the whole life cycle, from the oil and gas production to the facilities where the oil and gas is turned into plastic, where so many people are suffering such serious health impacts, and then all the way through the disposal, which most people know about the disposal. But you got to think about where the plastic came from too.
The other thing I was going to ask is, as what I think is very important is because obviously I think the companies and the government likes to make people think that it's the consumer's fault, right? And that we're not doing enough, we need to recycle more, even though recycling isn't enough anyway. But what do you think? Obviously it's important, but it's just not gonna, again, I love the whole concept about turning the tap off. Like, please, can we turn the tap off? But what is the best way to move forward and push the people in charge to actually change the policies?
I'm so glad you said that about pushing the people in charge to change the policies, because so often people think, what can I do to reduce plastic, and exhaust themselves. There's all these people, I live in California, and there's all these families that try to produce, only this much plastic per year, and it takes so much effort. And that's a interesting exercise to do, but that time is better spent trying to change the policies. That's where the biggest lever is. And policies to reduce plastic can happen at the local level, at the city level. They can happen at the state level. They can happen at the federal level. I'll tell you, where I live in California is probably the most environmentally aware town in the country. And we did decades of campaigns to bring your own reusable shopping bag. But it wasn't the law. You could still get a plastic bag. So I usually brought my own shopping bag, but I admit sometimes I was at the door and I had left it in the car. Sometimes I didn't. So we got a ban on single-use plastic bags. There still are paper bags for people who need a bag. And overnight, just once this ban went into effect, overnight plastic bags just disappeared. We could never have gotten to that level of plastic reduction just by nagging people. And also, nagging is not really fun for the nagger or the naggy. We got to think about how to change practices without becoming, whiny nags, because that doesn't recruit people to our movement. And so now what's happened is that the norms have changed around shopping. Nobody asks for a plastic bag. And in fact, if you did forget your bag, you can buy a paper bag for 5 cents, but that would be so embarrassing to get a bag now. I see people like pulling their sweatshirts out with all their cans of soup in it and carrying it out to the car, because we have totally changed the cultural norms. So I think bans on the most hazardous products, single-use plastic, PVC plastic, those are great. Bans at the city level, at the state level, and at the federal level. I mean, I saw in the chat that there are people from all different countries joining in. So welcome, great to see you. And different places would have different entree points that make the most sense. It often helps to start small. If you're not even ready to get your city to ban bottled water or single-use plastic, start with your school, start with your work, start with your gym. Like, does your gym have bottled water? That's nuts. You got to get rid of that. Get a refillable water. Start locally, as small and locally as possible, to build your muscles. And then once you get your gym, once you get your school, once you get your church, once you get your workplace, then scale up and up and up until it just takes over the whole planet.
I just love how you talk about all of this, again, with a smile on your face, because this is such a subject that I think most people get scared to talk about or saddened by, but we can still make a difference, and the hope is still there. And that's what I think is the most important thing to keep talking about. And it's obviously, it's clear from the documentary that the plastic crisis is not as much about littering as much as it's about social justice and the climate and environmental breakdown, right? Can you explain the relationship between plastic and the climate and social justice versus plastic and littering?
Absolutely. So the plastic and littering, I mean, the end of life disposal of the plastic, like if you dump it on the curb or the bin, that's like 5 seconds in its whole long life. And that's what industry has been so good at making us think that's the issue. So really with plastic, it's made out of fossil fuels. So it starts when oil and gas is pulled out of the earth. Usually that's in areas where it leaves enormous environmental devastation. It's often on indigenous lands. It's often in, this is where the social justice comes in. It's often in low-income communities, communities of color. It's communities that society has decided don't deserve the absolute best environmental health and protection. So there's an environmental justice violation at the very beginning of plastic's life cycle when you pull out the oil and gas. Then it is trucked or trained. There's these oil trains that are like traveling bombs that explode that are so horrific. We transport this stuff to facilities where we then mix in hazardous chemicals, stabilizers, dyes, all plasticizers. We have this already toxic petroleum, oil and gas. We mix in these hazardous chemicals, and those facilities, the workers are exposed. So there you've got your worker health and justice issue. Again, they are predominantly located in low-income communities of color. So again, you've got an environmental and social justice issue where whole communities are treated as disposable that have to breathe the impacts of these horrific petrochemical facilities. There's some places in the Gulf in the U.S., the Gulf of Mexico, that are so cram-packed of these things that they're called national sacrifice zones, or they call them Cancer Alley. The health impacts are so violent. It's like a systemic violence associated with this. That's then you produce the stuff, and also all these chemicals are mixed in there. They're not just the workers are exposed, but then you bring it to the consumer who's going to use the stuff. Then we get exposed by using these plastic products that leak endocrine disrupting chemicals, neurotoxins, all of these things, and then it's disposed. And so it either goes to a landfill or an incinerator, which is again located in low-income communities of color, or exported overseas or dumped somewhere. So from production to extraction to production to use to disposal, the whole thing is a huge mess. And the alternative is carry a cloth bag, wash your dish. Like, the alternatives are so much simpler. You asked why I stay so positive and hopeful. It's because there's alternatives. This is not an intractable problem. There are some problems that are really, really hard and I don't know how to solve. This is not one of them. Like, we absolutely could do something different if everybody bands together and demands that change. This is totally solvable.
I mean, that's the problem as well, that you see about the people who've lived and were born and raised in those areas who've just seen it change within 10 years. Like, I thought, especially about the documentary, that timeline, what you saw, and when people started to fight against it. And now what the companies do and say, like, we're going to be better, we're going to try, we're going to say all these things. You just look at them and you're like, you're just lying though. And you're just hiding stuff. And all those adverts they make, and the advertising companies who do them, it's just, they're made with that light music and those like all American voices. And it makes me sick, really, and angry and sad, most of all. Those are kind of all those feelings that come up. Where do you think plastic fits into the wider context of waste and consumerism in general, though?
Well, I think it fits in enormous ways. One way that plastic fits into waste is that plastic is the fastest growing and most hazardous part of our waste stream right now. I have a funny hobby, which may sound weird, but I really encourage it. It's fascinating, is I love going to visit landfills. And I've been doing it since my first landfill in 1986. If you go to visit landfills often and you just stand there and you look out at the waste, first of all, it's fascinating to actually see what's coming out of our society. But I mean, I've been doing this for a long time. I do it in every city I go to. I go visit the dump because you get to learn so much about that society. And you can just do we call it visual audit. Just look and see what's changing. It's almost all plastic now. And the problem with that is there's nothing to do with plastic garbage. There's other stuff in the waste stream that's not really waste, that it's resources in the wrong place. Paper you can recycle. Organic stuff, food waste you can compost. Metal you can recycle. A lot of things you can reuse. Most of the things in the waste stream, there are rational solutions for it, but there is nothing you can do with plastic. And so a lot of environmentalists that mean really well look at a pile of plastic and say, what should we do with it? There's no answer. It's too late. You can dump it, you can burn it, or you can export it on dump in somebody else's yard. Very, very tiny bit you can recycle, but very little. So we have to not just look at plastic as a waste problem, but as a materials problem. And the waste stream has just changed so much over the last 30 years with so much plastic. Let me tell you, we're going to see a lot more of it now, because the fossil fuel industries are banking on massive expansion of plastic. This is a really important point for folks to realize. The fossil fuel companies, they exist to pull oil and gas out of the ground. That's what they do. That's what they have always done. That's why they have promulgated fake science, denied climate activism, blocked climate solutions. They want to keep pulling that stuff out of the ground. And they know that the demand for fossil fuels for energy is going down. We're seeing buildings become more energy efficient. Cars the whole transportation is becoming electrified. All around the world, renewable energy is exploding. So the demand for fossil fuels for power is shrinking. So what those fossil fuel companies should do is say, we've had a good run, we're going to shrink too, but they're not. They are absolutely committed to keep pulling that stuff out of the ground. So they are banking on massive increased plastic because plastic is fossil fuel. So that is sort of their Hail Mary. You know that term? It's a sports term. That's like their Hail Mary. It's a football term. Their last chance ditch effort to stay in business. The petrochemical industries are trying to triple the amount of single-use plastic that we use in this country. I mean, we're already drowning in it. We must resist this. We must stand together and say, absolutely not. You fooled us before. You told us it was recyclable. You told us you cared about the environment. You will not fool us again.
Will you take me to a landfill at some point, especially if we both live in California?
That would be so fun. That would be fascinating.
I would love to. I would really love to. Also, what is the role of the economy in all this generally?
Well, the economy is a set of rules that influence what decisions are made. And it's really important to realize that because the current rules facilitate waste. They reward people and businesses for making waste. I mean, one example is the enormous amount of public money, our money, that goes to subsidize fossil fuels. And fossil fuels are the feedstock to plastics. I had a conversation with somebody who works at a gigantic corporation that uses tons of plastic, and I can't tell you which corporation because it was a private conversation, but I asked the person, what alternatives are you looking at for plastics, for all of the shampoos and everything that your gigantic company makes? And he had so many examples. They have plastic made out of mushrooms. They have plastic that turns into fish food when it gets wet. Like, they have so many technologically possible options. It's incredible. I said, why aren't you using those? And they said, because new plastic is so cheap, because it's so cheap to get new oil and gas. They said that the rules in the economy have made it that it's much, much more expensive for them to do what is right. And that means the rules are wrong. And so I asked this person, what can a group like Greenpeace do? What can activists like our Greenpeace supporters around the world, what can we do to change the situation to encourage the use of these alternatives? And he said, go fight oil and gas. He said, keep it in the ground. He said, fight fossil fuels. He said, the less fossil fuels, the more the situation changes, the context changes, and then the alternatives are available. But don't let any company, any government person tell you there is no alternative, because that is a huge fat lie.
Well said. I think, Christopher, should we just go on to people's questions? Because thank you guys so much, because you guys have been sending some wonderful questions.
Yes, we can go in. I put some in the doc already.
Gosh, there's so many questions from all over the world.
Yeah.
I mean, it's wonderful. Shall I just go for the first one? Okay, so sorry if I say anyone's names wrong, because we have such an amazing group of people from around the world. Reem El Sheikh did say a while ago, do you think the damage that has been done now can be undone or just reduced? If so, what are the important ways for young teenagers like me to help or contribute in helping? Great question.
So there is some environmental damage that is so bad that we can't undo it. But the more important thing is to stop more. I mean, the analogy of the bathtub that you mentioned earlier is a perfect analogy about plastics. Or I often say, if you came home from holiday and you had left your kitchen tap on and your sink was overflowing with water and the kitchen was overflowing with water and your living room was overflowing with water and your beautiful carpets were getting all wet, what is the first thing do? Do you start mopping those carpets, or do you go turn off the tap? And that's what
Can you explain a little bit about the turning off the bath analogy? Because in case anyone hasn't watched it, it would be helpful to explain it, because I don't mean actually turning off the tap in the bath, everyone who hasn't seen it, but if you want to explain that a little bit.
Yeah, what that refers to is that there's so much new plastic waste entering the environment every second. There's so much new plastic that if we worry about cleaning it up, and it's still coming, we're never going to catch up. So if your bathtub was overflowing, do you work on capturing the water that's pouring out of it, or do you go turn off the tap? So in terms of the oceans, we see a lot of interest in cleaning up the oceans. And I'm so sorry. I wish it was possible. It would be so beautiful if it was possible. It's simply not possible, because the ocean is so vast. The pieces of plastic many of them are so small, not all, there's some big ones too, but many of them have been beaten down by the waves and the sun, that they're so tiny that any kind of vacuum or something that would try to clean up all that plastic out of the ocean, it would also suck up life that we don't want. And the ocean is too huge. You just simply can never clean up at that scale. So instead of trying to clean it up, stop the new plastic from coming in. That means banning single-use plastic as much as possible. It means stopping these companies from building out new factories to make more single-use plastic. It means going to the bank where you bank and finding out if that bank funds fossil fuel projects and say, you stop funding those fossil fuel projects or we're going to cut up our card. It means going to your government and saying, I don't want any public subsidies to fossil fuel corporations. Do you know, right now in the US, because of COVID, all these companies are going to the government to ask for a bailout. The plastics industry that has caused billions and billions and billions of dollars of damage around the world to people's health, to community health, to the oceans, they're going to the US government and asking for $1 billion in bailout to help the plastic industry because how they've been hurt by COVID. That's our money. Absolutely not. Call your elected representatives. Tell them, no, our public money should be spent on building a better future, not propping up the companies that are threatening the planet.
There's so many amazing questions coming up in the chat, and obviously we're not going to be able to answer all of them, but just to say to everyone who is asking questions, keep pouring them in and we will try our hardest to answer them. We'll get a team on it to answer them and then share it out, because we've got obviously everyone's contact details, so we can do like a proper follow-up and keep these conversations going. So if your questions aren't answered, then we will try our best to answer them after the call as well.
I also want to say that both Greenpeace and Story of Stuff have a lot of information on their websites about plastic with lots of opportunities to get involved. So please check out Greenpeace and Story of Stuff project.
Yeah, please, everyone, check it out.
We just got a great comment saying one way of reducing waste is incorporating a circular economy. The Netherlands have great projects that they are incorporating on their communities to reach this goal. I like that.
That circular economy is an alternative to what I call a linear economy, the take, make, waste economy. In a linear economy, you pull something out of the earth, you process it, you use it, and you throw it away. So it's pulling it out, it's one way. Circular economy is to make it a closed loop so that you do the same thing over and over and over. And the great thing about moving towards a circular economy is you have less natural resource input, so you're harvesting and mining and logging and taking less out of the earth, and you have less waste output, so you're getting rid of less waste. It's circular economy. And there's some things that you can do a circular economy for a long time. Plastic is very limited in how you can use it in the circular economy. For one thing, there's so much plastic. There's more than any country's recycling system can handle. The companies love to tell us that plastic is recycled or recyclable. Only 9% of plastic ever produced has been recycled. And so that's one issue. There's just too much. Part of circular economy is using less from the beginning. But the other problem with plastic is you can't recycle it indefinitely. Is that plastic is made up of these long chains of chemicals, and when they are heated and reused, those chains break down, so it becomes a lower quality material. So you can't make a plastic bottle out of a plastic bottle out of a plastic bottle forever. You just simply can't. With real recycling, what you want to do is reduce the input, reduce the output by doing round like this. You can't with plastic. So they often call it downcycling. Technically, it's not really recycling, it's downcycling. You make a secondary lower quality product out of it. So instead of, say you have a plastic Coke bottle or something, you can't make a Coke bottle out of a Coke bottle out of a Coke bottle. You might make that Coke bottle could be a fleece jacket or a doormat or a kitchen container or something, but then that thing gets thrown away. So plastic recycling doesn't solve the problem, and in fact can actually delude people into thinking it's helping and increase the amount of plastic. So it's a very dangerous narrative that plastic recycling is going to save us.
There's a brilliant comment from someone. And she says, I also live in Jakarta. Plastic problems are very difficult in my country. Besides the problem that my country has become a dumping ground for plastic from several countries, but also my country still has a very big problem, namely public awareness about stopping using plastic is not good. It is true that Jakarta, where I live, that many shops have stopped using plastic, but the reality is that not all stores have. In fact, there are still many who still use plastic, especially in rural areas where they live. Is there a most effective way to deal with this problem, especially for me, ordinary people in my country?
Sorry to be annoying, guys. I lost you again, Annie. I'm still on it, but I think you've gone. Sorry.
Let's see.
We can try once, if we lose Instagram, we lose Instagram, but maybe we can try once more.
Fine. Fantastic. If you want to try once more.
Did
I'm really impressed with all these questions. Help us!
It kicked me off again. Can you make it ask again? Do you want to just wait in here?
Can you just sit in, you adorable angel?
Exit. Oh, wait, no.
Okay.
It
should. We have to do that send request.
We all need a billion our lives.
There we go. Sent. Request sent.
Okay. I'm ready.
This is actually a very good. This is a very good metaphor for being an activist for the environment, because you must not give up. You must be tenacious. You must be relentless. No matter how many obstacles you face, you keep going, as we're doing with this Instagram Live. So it is a metaphor for what it takes to clean up this mess. Okay, back to Jakarta. I've actually visited the dumps in Jakarta a number of times, so wonderful to have Jakarta here. Indonesia is one of the countries that Europe and the United States has historically sent plastic waste to, used it as our rubbish bin. In the countryside in Jakarta, I have gone to fields where there's loads of plastic dumped from Europe that actually has little recycling logos from Germany's Green Dot program and these other recycling programs in Europe. It is such a scam. So I'm very familiar with the waste situation there in Jakarta, and thank you so much for joining us. I don't always blame the small mom and pop shops that are selling plastic, because as we talked about earlier, the economy is set up to make that often be the only option that they have. And so what we really need to do is change the rules. And in terms of single-use plastic bags, which I know a lot of those small shops around Indonesia and many, many, many other countries sell, they have to just be banned. They are an absolute menace. The cost to cities to have to deal with those things when they are thrown away is so expensive that one of the ways you can convince a city to ban single-use plastics is ask them how much money they're spending cleaning this stuff up. Imagine if they did not have to go around scooping this out of rivers, unplugging drainage ditches. Those single-use plastic bags, in many countries, they block the drainage ditches. Then there's a heavy rainstorm, and then there's a big flood. Like, that's all the cost of having single-use plastic that isn't showing up on the company's accounting books. It's showing on the public's. And so single-use plastic is a great money saver for cities to ban, and then they can use that money for doing promoting health and equity and other good things instead of just cleaning up after these polluting companies. But if you're in Jakarta, you can look at Greenpeace is in Indonesia working against single-use plastic. They would love to have you contact them. There's another wonderful organization that's in 91 countries fighting plastic that's called Gaia, G-A-I-A. And I know they have a group in Indonesia called WALHI, is a member of theirs that is very active. So lots of groups to get involved. So you don't have to figure this stuff out alone. That's important for folks to know. There are so many groups working on this. The best first thing to do is connect with a group so that you don't have to take this out alone.
Mention that horrible fact about the amount of money that they started putting into clearing up the waste, those companies, but then how much money they're actually putting into making more plastic. What was the stat? Because it was terrifying. It was like 1.5.
I forget the number offhand, but you're talking about this new totally bogus effort that a bunch of companies have made. And it's called the Alliance to End Plastic Waste. And it's the exact same thing they tried to do in the 70s and 80s and 90s, which is focus our attention on waste. So it's a completely bogus PR thing that all these companies that make or use huge amounts of plastic are putting money into to do a big PR campaign about ending plastic waste. So that it's focusing our attention on the end of the life cycle again. I always want to go on their website and cross out the word waste. It should be the Alliance to End Plastic, not the Alliance to End Plastic Waste. I will say some people often say, there's some plastic we need. And that is true. There is some plastic that we as a society might say is worth using. I mean, there's maybe some medical purposes. There are some, very, very narrow group of plastic uses that we might, as a society, say this increases health. It increases equity. It's worth it for us as a society to use. That's not most plastic. The vast majority of plastic we could design out of the system through different materials, through different design processes, and we would be a healthy, safer, more resilient, and more fair planet if we did that.
I think the stat was something like 1.5 billion to do clean up plastic waste, and it's 200 billion putting into it, which is
something
just
like that. I think it was 1.5 billion to say how much they care about plastic waste, not necessarily to clean it. Yeah, not necessarily to clean it up, but to convince us that they deeply, deeply care about this.
Should we go to another question? So I go to, sorry again if I say the names wrong, but Humphrey Trevelyan, I'm going to say, how the campaign against plastic connects with the broader environmental campaigns, such as Extinction Rebellion, and also campaigns against global poverty and exploitation.
Well, it depends how you look at plastic. If you only look at plastic as a waste issue, it doesn't connect that much with other things. But if you look at it more as a systems issue, it is so connected to all of those things. It is connected to public health. It is connected to climate, obviously, because it's fossil fuels. Extinction Rebellion is focusing on stopping fossil fuels, and fossil fuel companies are counting on us to continue and even increase our plastic use so that they can continue in existence. So when you see it as a systems issue, you see that plastic is connected to almost everything, which is why I think it's such a fascinating doorway through entering these issues. It's connected definitely to public health. It's connected to environmental justice, because plastic production and plastic disposal are so dangerous and disproportionately impact low-income and communities of color. It's connected to everything.
Got another question here from Zenon Kotsakis, and he said, I was wondering if there might be a possibility of taking legal action against parties such as the government or the supermarkets for lack of responsible measures to safeguard the public against the effects of plastic use. If we can point to the fact that the continued lack of restrictions on the production and use of plastic is continuing to have a negative impact on public health and the environment, wouldn't this be grounds for some form of legal actions?
It should be ground for some sort of legal action. And there's lots of lawyers that specialize in environmental harm that are investigating that. And every once in a while, there is a successful case where a particular community has been polluted from a plastic production facility and has had a successful case. So there are some precedents for doing that. But you know what the plastic industry is doing here in the United States? I don't know where else they're doing it around the world. They're so sneaky. What they're doing is they're trying to get ahead of that, and they're trying to pass laws at different state levels and nationally that prevent our right as citizens in our country, prevent our right to ban plastics and shield them from any liability. They don't want to be held accountable for the damage they're doing to people's health or to the environment. And they don't want us to organize and ban plastics. So plastics is not just an environmental issue, not just a climate issue, not just a health issue. It's also a democracy and human rights issue. Like, we should be allowed to organize in our communities to ban a material that we know makes us sick. And so those plastic companies are trying to get ahead of us. It's crazy to ban the banning of their toxic product. And we have to say, absolutely not. Our democracy is supposed to serve public health and well-being, not corporate profit. So it's a democracy issue too.
Christabel, do you want to do any other questions for anyone who's just kind of come through with them? Or what do you think?
Yes, I would. There's so many.
So many. What an engaged audience.
I know. Thank you everyone for sending in your questions. Okay, so back to recycling. I think quite good to just really unpack this a little bit more. So someone says, I've lost their name because I copy and pasted it. Hi everyone, thanks for this and your work. Annie, both your book and this documentary have been life-changing. Would you see plastic recycling as part of the solution if we could achieve an effective recycling system that can recycle mixed plastics?
So I think there is a role for recycling in the solution. But first of all, remember the mantra that we all learn in kindergarten: reduce, reuse, recycle. There is a reason recycling is last. Recycling is what we do when we have exhausted other options. It's what we do when we're total, it's what we do when our back is against the wall with the knife to our throat. We could not reuse it. We could not avoid it. Absolutely, it's the last thing we do. Too often, we're starting with recycling instead of starting with reducing and reusing. The problem with counting on recycling for plastic is one thing is there's just way, way, way too much plastic to manage that. It's like trying to deal with a tsunami with a teaspoon. There's just no way that we can meet the scale. The other thing is that recycling doesn't take care of the upstream problems. Remember the damage caused by oil and gas drilling, the damage to public health caused by the petrochemical facilities. You have to also look at the beginning of the life cycle of plastics. We're so trained in our society to think of plastic only as from the store to our house to the recycling bin, as though that's its whole life. Before it comes to us and after it leaves us, that's where the biggest problems are. And we can't forget both of those.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think what's been really helpful for me recently, especially since we started looking at wasted consumerism this month with EcoResolution, is to kind of really try and connect with the story of something. And that's why I love so much how, your work, the story of stuff and the story of plastic, it's telling the reader or the viewer to start thinking about the story of things. Where has something come from and where is it going? I'm really interested generally around like myths and narratives and the things that we kind of unconsciously abide by. And I think by us reconnecting with the stories of things and understanding that the things that are in our lives, these material products, like have value. And I think when we think, a lot of the time people say we live in a materialist culture as though that's a negative thing. I think if we did live in a materialist culture, we wouldn't have the waste problem that we have, because we'd be appreciating the material goods that we have. We live in I feel like it's more of an issue of not valuing the things in our life and not understanding how precious how precious these things are. And I love that you mentioned, what did you say, refuse and reduce and recycle being the last one, because we launched over Earth Week with Oceanic Global something called the 5R Challenge, which is meant to be rolling way beyond Earth Day. And the idea is to kind of look at how we can engage the 5Rs. And I think we also have refuse and rot in there, but definitely recycling is like the last ditch effort in the approach. But I'd love to just ask you a question, because where do you think individual action fits within the context of systems change? It's an area that I'm very interested in, and I think, like we need to not fall for these like solutions which are actually just little plasters on gaping wounds. At the same time, individual action is really powerful, and if we're not kind of embodying the changes that we want to see, it's going to be a lot harder for us to build the momentum in order to demand the top-down change. So yeah, I'd love to hear your thoughts on the relationship between us as individuals and this wider systemic change we need.
So I think there's 3 reasons that taking individual action are really important. One reason is because making the right choices brings into alignment our values and our actions. And then we're in a place of greater integrity. And from that place of greater integrity, we can engage for systemic change much better. I mean, we all know that when we do things that we know are bad for the planet, or unhealthy or unjust, it doesn't feel good. And so the more we can reduce that disalignment, then the more whole we can be entering the planet. So that's one thing for personal integrity. A second reason that trying to make the right choices is very important is it's a demonstration of our values, and it's a demonstration that alternatives exist. So I ride my bike, and I have solar panels, and I grow my vegetables in the backyard, and I bring my reusable bottle and my reusable cup here, the story of plastic reusable cup. I do all those things, not because I think that me doing that is going to make a difference in the amount of waste in the world, but because every time I do that, it shows policymakers, decision makers, my community, that another way is possible. So it's a proof of concept, which is important. But the third reason that trying to do the right thing individually is important, is it's a way to find the flaws in the system. It's kind of like a metal detector. You take over the economy and it tells you where something is wrong. Anytime that the onus is on us, if it's more expensive, more difficult, if we have to go out of our way to do the right thing, that's a systems flaw. That's how we find the system flaws. We should have our system designed to make doing the right thing be the easiest, cheapest, simplest thing to do. And anytime we have to go out of our way or spend more money, that means we found a thing in the system that needs to be changed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. That was really eloquently put. I think it's really important for us to remember that these systems have been created by humans. Like, these are not natural systems because there is no waste in nature. Humans are the only creature on this planet that have been able to create something called waste, something that's actually poisonous. And I think, we need to remember that also, our governments are elected governments, or they should be elected governments, and therefore they're there to serve humans and their populations, and make sure that they are creating systems which allow humans and the planet to thrive in harmony together. And that shouldn't, I feel like I sound hippie when I say that, but that just shouldn't be like an alternative thing to say. It feels like common sense to me. I'd love to ask one more question from our audience, because it really ties in with the context of today as well. If you note that the buy more consumerist mentality developed as a response to a major economic downturn, post-depression and world war, what safeguards can we put in place to stop this happening after today's crisis and ensuing economic downturn? Are you worried about a consumer backlash?
That is such a timely and important question, because we obviously have to kickstart our economy all around the world, because many people are seriously economically hurting. So we want more economic activity, but we don't want just any economic activity. We want economic activity that makes our society more healthy, more equitable, more fair. So we have to be discriminating and learn from mistakes of the past. Now, all of our countries, probably every single country on the planet, the government is looking at spending money to address the COVID crisis. And this is an incredible opportunity. This is a once-in-a-generation opportunity. For 30 years, I have been saying to our government, we need action on climate. We need action on reducing waste. And you get the same answer all the time is, that's nice, but there's no money for that. We can't afford that, even while they're spending trillions of dollars on military equipment. But even besides that, the number one excuse that governments say to resist moving to a more equitable, more just, more sustainable society is it's too expensive. They are right now going to be injecting trillions and trillions of dollars or euros or rupees or whatever currency you have into the economy to address COVID. All of us have to work to make sure that money is a down payment on a better future, that we do it right this time, rather than use that money to prop up the polluting, lying industries that got into this mess. In the United States, the government is right now considering whether or not to give $3 trillion to the fossil fuel industry to prop them up. Absolutely not. That's our money. It's public money. We have to organize and demand that they put people and the planet over profits. This is literally a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to influence this massive public expenditure towards the future that we want.
Thank you.
Especially with what's going on though, and the way to how do we combat something like that again? Because at the moment, London was a great typical way of it, showing Extinction Rebellion, but there's no way we can protest. What can we do at this point? What do we do? Right? We can sign things, but what can we actually do at this point? Not to be a downer on it, but how do we stop that from happening in your mind?
Well, first of all, we're not going to be stuck in our houses forever. We will, again, be able to fill the streets. And so do not forget that. And we may have to stand 6 feet or 2 meters apart to do that, but we will fill the streets again. And do not let our elected officials forget that. But the other thing is, remember, in most countries, they are elected officials, which mean they work for us. They serve at our pleasure. And so we need to vote. Now, voting is kind of like, recycling in some ways. It's the smallest possible tiny thing. It's not enough, but it is very important to do, especially if you're in the United States. This upcoming election is very important. Greenpeace is nonpartisan. We won't tell you who to vote for, but we will tell you one is a lot worse on climate than the other one. One is a lot worse on the environment than the other one. And some people say, I don't want to vote because I don't like any of them. And I say, I'm not asking you to date them. You don't have to be their roommate. Voting is not sending a Valentine. It is a tactical decision of who is going to screw things up the least. It matters. And so vote. Get everybody you know to vote. And we have to show that if these politicians take money from the fossil fuel companies, if these politicians sell out community and public health for corporate profit, we are going to help them find a new job because they're not very good at this job. So they need to be moved on out. We really have to hold their feet to the fire when they get elected.
Yeah, I think what you said, as soon as we can, and even if we have to, if it gets to the point where we need to stand 6 feet away from each other and protest, I think that's something that is the most important thing, because that really shows how many people will band together and what people will do for our future generations. It's the most important thing.
We have exhausted all the polite levers of our democracy. Like when I was in university, I studied environmental science, and I was so naive. I thought that the science and the truth would you'd present it to politicians and they would act upon it. We have now seen, it was just the 50th anniversary of Earth Day, we have now seen 50 years of presenting science, presenting economic arguments. We have written books. We have had millions of people sign petitions. We have made documentaries. We've had experts come and testify. I mean, we have exhausted the polite levers that our democracy offers us. And at this point, the window to solve both climate and plastic waste, which are really so connected, I shouldn't even say both, climate and plastic waste, the window to solve that is shrinking. And it's not our fault that we need to escalate and be more bold and radical in our demands. It's their fault because they did not respond to 50 years of good science. So we need to vote them out. We need to fill the streets. We need to write, call, bombard them with public pressure and not let them off the hook. We need to really put our bodies on the line through civil disobedience, which is why I'm such a big fan of groups like Extinction Rebellion and Greenpeace that are willing to do nonviolent civil disobedience, because the polite levers of democracy have not worked.
Yeah, absolutely. Annie, you've been amazing. And I just want to ask if Cara, if you've got any more comments you'd want to share, or Annie, if you would like to share any more comments.
I'd love to say get involved with us. If you're in the United States, you can get involved with Greenpeace's campaign against plastic by taking your cell phone and texting the word plastic to 877-877. Just that number, 877-877. Text the word plastic, and we'll plug you into our plastics campaign. If you're in another country, look for your local Greenpeace. Look at Gaia, that's that global anti-incinerator alliance that works all around the world. Get involved with others. If you can't find a group there on these issues, start your own. We'll give you some information to help, because nothing works better than collective action, us working together. It feeds our souls, it's fun, and it builds the power we need to drive change.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's so easy to feel alone in these issues, and I really appreciate and just feel so grateful that everyone's tuned in today, and that there was such a big uptake, and there's everyone on Facebook Live and Instagram Live as well listening in. It really means a lot when the system, like the systemic issues, can feel so huge, and individual actions, while so important, can feel so small. And I think just to remember that, right now there's thousands of people who are listening to this conversation, and all the comments and questions that are pouring in, and it just feels really good to remember that even in social isolation, these are still crucial issues that we all are thinking about and caring about and addressing.
You're not alone. You're not alone.
Yeah, and there's all kinds of groups, that we can be joining, and so many different kinds of action. Annie, I would love to go and start visiting landfills, because I think that must be such a kind of important way to burn into my awareness of actually how bad
Christabel, please, can we do that? I would love that so much.
I love it.
Annie, it's a date, seriously. That would be wonderful.
It's so fascinating. You just won't even believe it. It's fascinating, especially if you do it regularly, so you can see how the waste changes. because it's almost all plastic now. When I started in the 80s, it wasn't all plastic. It was materials that we could figure out how to safely use if we had the right systems. But there's literally nothing we can do with all this plastic that is not a problem for health and the environment.
We are going to have to wrap up, but I just want to remind everyone that we're going to try and answer everyone's questions. It might take a little while.
You're very ambitious.
But we will try and answer some of them and get that up on the website, and also follow up with everyone via email. You know, thinking a little bit more about how we do keep it in the ground, how we can lobby. And also, if we are stuck at home, now's quite a good time to get on letter writing, emailing, all of that kind of thing as well. Seeking out the local groups in your area. And like Annie said, if they don't exist, maybe creating some. EcoResolution is... we're working on developing a sort of like a global network. So linking people up to share ideas, to share skills, to create more of a sense of community, of all the positive ways that we can take action, because there's so many wonderful people already messaging us saying that they want to get involved and they want to feel supported, because I understand that not all communities and not all like social networks feel maybe the way that you feel. So yeah, again, you know, you're not alone. And I just hope that we can all really like share the documentary, The Story of Plastic, spread the word, get people to watch it. It's such a special and powerful documentary in that, yes, individual actions are so important, but you know, these issues are systemic and they are interlinked. And while on one hand, that can be overwhelming, on the other hand, you know, start working on one, it means the other ones are going to be getting better as well, because they're so interlinked. And yeah, let's all boycott plastic as well. Cara, would you like to share anything?
No, I again, thank you so much, Annie, for taking the time. And I hope everyone, you know, really, I really want everyone to watch the documentary. And if it's too much, you know, the story of stuff, 20 minutes long, also the book, I can't wait to read it. And I think we've all just got to band together and realize that, you know, this is an impossible thing to fight. We can do it, and to keep hopeful, you know, in with everything that's going on in the world. But I think the more we have conversations and stop trying to hate each other and call people hypocrites, yes, we're all humans, we're all hypocrites. It's fine. We're all trying to do our best. That's it. Let's just love each other and try and do what we can, you know?
More love, less plastic.
Absolutely.
More love, less plastic.
Yes. And I just want to share with everyone that next month, as in tomorrow, EcoResolution we're going to be continuing via our website to explore waste and consumerism, but like as the more like Instagram, social media side of things, we're going to be moving on towards the stories of separation. So we're going to be looking at our relationship with nature and how we kind of understand nature and our relationship to it, and how, you know, often in mainstream worldview, we see it as separate to ourselves and maybe perhaps humans above nature. So we're going to be having a look at that. And to wrap up, I would like to leave... have I frozen? Because Annie's frozen for me.
No, you look good.
Okay, cool. You're back as well. So to wrap up, I want to finish with one of my favorite quotes from Annie from her book, The Story of Stuff, which I have almost every line in it. Or every sentence is underlined as an important part. So I really couldn't recommend it more. So Annie says, I invite the citizen in you to become louder than the consumer inside you, and to launch a very rich, very loud dialogue with your community. So that's something we can all be doing from our devices at home and out in the world, taking action as well. So Cara, thank you so much. Annie Leonard, thank you so much. And yes, let's keep these conversations going.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure.
And thank you everyone for tuning in and for your questions.
And Ruby, thank you so much, guys. And yeah, thank you for all the audience. And I hope you guys loved it. And check it out if you haven't seen it yet. All right. Love you guys. See you until soon. Yeah, exactly.